This is part 2 of our examination of W.T. Stace's views on freedom and determinism. We've labeled him as a basic compatibilist because he affirms that we are just as determined as anything else in nature, and yet we are free. He says that determinism is required for punishment, and that's legitimate. So when it comes to human actions, we're both free and determined. Let's look at some criticisms of this view. So one criticism here that is very significant is that everything depends on his definition of freedom, right? He says that the whole issue is a verbal dispute. And if it's a verbal dispute, he says the way we solve it is by getting the right definition of freedom. And then he says what freedom is, free actions are when we act according to our internal psychological states. When those are the cause of our actions, then we are free, right? So this is how he put it, right? If your actions are caused by your internal psychological states, then you are free. Now, what's wrong with that? For one, it does not account for options in making free choices. But that's an essential aspect of freedom, right? If you are asked, which do you want, pizza or fried chicken? And then you say pizza, and they say, well, we only have fried chicken, right? So is that a choice? Is that free? Do you choose fried chicken freely in that case when you only have the one option? It certainly seems not. Options, having possible alternatives, seems to be crucial to our idea of freedom, but he doesn't include that at all. In fact, in many cases, his definition fails because of this lack. And his definition fails even in some of the examples that Stace himself described. So recall our table. We have unfree actions on the right, we have free actions on the left. First example with Gandhi fasting because he wanted to free India. Okay, makes sense, internal psychological states. Unfree action, no food available because you're lost, makes sense. External forces causing you not to eat. Second case there, leaving the office, that seems to fit, very reasonable, fine. If you leave your office because somebody is forcibly removing you, that's not a free action. But let's look at this third case, and I've changed the order, by the way, of what he initially presented. Stealing bread because one's hungry, that he says is free, internal psychological states, you're hungry, the hunger causes you to steal. But consider the unfree action, something that Stace himself has identified as an unfree action. Stealing because one's employer threatened to beat you. Now, wait a minute. They threatened to beat you, so you went out and stole. What caused you to steal? Was it not your fear that you would get beaten and your fear that you would lose your job? And what is fear but an internal psychological state? So you're motivated by your internal psychological states to steal. Right? It doesn't matter. Sometimes our internal psychological states are caused by things external to us. That happens all the time. So it really doesn't matter if we were threatened. The immediate cause of the theft was the fear. The same thing in the case of signing a confession. So I presume here the police are already beating you the way it's worded. So in order to stop the pain, to stop the beating, you sign the confession in this case. Well, again, it's not like they grabbed your arm and caused your hand to move with your signature. So is it really an outside force or an internal psychological state? What's the immediate cause of the action? Is it not the desire to relieve the pain? And so it just isn't clear. We have cases on the right-hand side that Stace identifies as unfree, but they fit his definition of being a free action. And this is going to be true. Stace discusses a situation of a mugging, and he says, yeah, it's kind of, gray area, which it is. Well, if your whole case depends on your definition, and your definition says that something's free, when you yourself say it's definitely not free, as these latter two cases on the right show, well, that's a significant problem with your case. All right, there is something else that's clearly wrong here when we're considering the definition, and that is that idea of atto. Recall, the ability to do otherwise is what that stands for, and determinism. So Stace says we're free because we could have done otherwise if we had wanted to, and yet we're just as determined as anything else in nature. Now, if we're just as determined as anything else in nature, that means our psychological states are determined as well, right? Just like Holbach described. We have our psychological states because of forces that we didn't choose. We didn't choose our genetics, the way we were raised, the environment we were in at that time. And all of those things bring us to any given action that we have. So sure, we could have done otherwise if we had wanted to, but could we have wanted to? And the problem there is, if determinism is true, no, which means we're never free, according to his clause. Now, this is a concern now, right? So do we ever have freedom? Do we ever have a case where we could have done otherwise if we had wanted to? And then we could have wanted to do otherwise. Not if determinism is true, which is what Stace ultimately affirms about humans. So that's very problematic. Here's another more direct argument against the position itself of compatibilism. This is a consequence argument. It's been around for a long time, but made very prominent in recent decades by Peter van Inwagen. And it says, okay, if determinism is true, then my actions are caused by the state of the world in the distant past and the laws of nature. At one point in the distant past, it was going to be true that there's only one physically possible future, and that was the case even before I was born, right? And so the laws of nature, given the state of the world, that determines everything, including my actions. And I have no control over the state of the world in the distant past. I can't go back in time and change it. And I also have no control over the laws of nature. I can't make gravity different than what it is. Therefore, if determinism is true, I have no control over my actions. That's what follows from those first two premises. And of course, if I have no control over my actions, then I have no free will. Anyone would agree with that, right? If you don't have any control over your actions, over what you do, then you're not acting freely. And so if determinism is true, that's how we started premise one, then I have no free will, which means that compatibilism of any kind is false. And even though Stace may not have affirmed determinism in that very robust way of having only one possible future, he did affirm determinism in regards to human actions and everything about us. And so it's still going to be true of us. The state that we were in 5 years ago, plus the laws of nature, determines every action that we take today. And the 5 years, of course, was just a random selection. You could go back as far as you were 1 year old, for that matter. And the argument works against Stace here too. You cannot possibly have both determinism and free will. So that's an argument to consider. Finally, let's consider a third argument, the argument from Deliberation. Now, this goes back all the way to Aristotle. We begin by just pondering this evident truth. We all deliberate at times over a choice we have to make. This would include small choices, what to have for dessert at a restaurant, or whether or not to have dessert, to big choices, whether to move in with someone or whether to marry someone. And all of us face these kinds of options from time to time. We deliberate. And when we deliberate, we believe that we have alternatives. We believe in the possibility of doing A or the possibility of doing something other than A. And that implies that we're not determined. That implies that the future is open to us and we will decide which direction the future goes. Will it be one in which I do A, or will it be one in which I do not do A? And we believe that we are the ones in control of that. So that is a requirement for deliberation, and deliberation is a universal human experience. However, Stace, with basic compatibilism, and other soft determinists who are compatibilist, claim that we are determined. Some affirm that we are determined in that robust sense that everything is absolutely determined, so that given any given state of the world, there is only one possible future. Some, like Stace, say, well, humans are determined. Determinism is true for humans. So any given state of our life, there's only one possible future for us and no alternatives. So what's the problem? Hopefully it's pretty clear. Compatibilists have inconsistent beliefs, right? The compatibilist believes both that we are determined, that's the thesis that they have, and that we are not determined. They believe that whenever they deliberate, or their beliefs while deliberating imply that determinism is false. And so they have these inconsistent beliefs that determinism is true and determinism is false. And anyone who has inconsistent beliefs like that is in trouble, right? That is an irrational position to hold.